Okay, so we're going to have a quick look at a simple if statement today. So an if statement is a piece of programming used where you want your program to do different things depending on some condition within the program. So we're just going to look at the simplest form of if statement to start off with. But before we do, I'm just going to need to write a small program just so that we can demonstrate how this if statement is going to work. So I'm just going to declare a variable and call it user input as an integer. And I'm just going to prompt the user to enter a number and then read that in. So I'm going to use the console.write and just say, please enter a number between 1 and 100. Don't forget a colon and a space in there so you don't have to type right next to the 100 on the console. User input is console.readLine, so reading that in there. So once we've read that in and stored it in our user input variable, I'm just going to write out one of two things to the console. So here's where the if statement comes in. So if the user has entered a number between 1 and 49, I'm going to print out one message, maybe something like you've entered a low number. If they've entered a number between 50 and 100, I'll just print out you've entered a high number. So an if statement works something like this. We start off with the if keyword, and we then need to put our condition. So our condition in this case is going to be if user input is greater than or less than 49. So in this instance, I'll first of all say if user input is less than or equal to 49, then hit the enter key, puts my end if in for me. So I can just type what I want to happen if user input is less than or equal to 49 in between those two lines there. So we'll just say console.writeLine, you have entered a low number, and then I'll do another if statement underneath and say if user input is greater than 49, then we'll write out a similar message and we'll say you have entered a high number. Don't forget a console.read at the end, because if we don't put a console.read in, our console will appear, the program will run, and it will disappear again before we get a chance to see what's actually been written on the console. So let's run this and see what happens then. So we're prompted with a message asking us to enter a number between 1 and 100, so I'll just put 20 in there, press the return key, and it tells me that I've entered a low number. I'll stop this and just rerun it, and this time we'll enter a 50, and hopefully it should tell us that we've entered a high number, and yes it does. Just to test, we'll try 49 as well, and it should tell us it's a low number, and yes it does. So we'll just go through the code again just so that we're clear on what's happening here. So we've got a variable called user input as an integer, and then we're requesting that the user enters a number between 1 and 100 here. We're reading that in, and we're storing it in our user input variable, and we're then saying we've got two separate if statements here. So we've got one if statement that says if our user input is less than or equal to 49, then could you console.writeLine you've entered a low number, end if, so that's the end of that if statement, and then our second if statement starts here. If user input is greater than 49, then console.writeLine you have entered a high number. Little console.read on the end, just so we can see what happens before the console disappears. So that's the first way of doing an if statement. Now we can combine these two if statements into one, which is slightly better programming, because here we've got two separate statements where we could do both of those in one. So I'm just going to put some space in here and just comment those out and show you the way of doing it in one. So very similar, we start off with if user input is less than or equal to 49, then exactly the same as before, press the return key and it puts our end if in, and we want to do the exact same thing. So if it's less than or equal to 49, you've entered a low number. Also inside this if statement, I'm then going to put else and press the enter key. Now inside this else section is where the kind of flip side of the condition goes. So I'm going to copy and paste in my you've entered a high number line, And that should work in exactly the same way as this code down here, which is commented out did. So we're saying if our user input is less than or equal to 49, then console.writeLine, you've entered a low number. Else, so in any case where user input is not less than or equal to 49, can you do this? Console.writeLine, you have entered a high number. I'm still leaving my console.read on the end so that we can see what happens before the console disappears. And if I just run this and test a few times, it should give us the exact same result. So we'll go 20 is a low number again. Just rerun that. 50 should give us a high number. And finally 49 will give us a low number.